Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is The Raptor, and welcome back to Death Battle vs. Matchup Review, where I give my honest thoughts on fight ideas that come from my subscribers. If you have any ideas, you can follow the Who Would Win polls that I post on my community tab about once a week. The most liked suggestion in the comments on those posts become the next poll, and get saved for a future matchup review video. We've done a few of these already, so check those out if you want, but first, let's take a look at this next batch of ideas. So first up on the list is SpongeBob vs. Gumball, Nickelodeon vs. Cartoon Network. This matchup feels a little weirder to talk about now that SpongeBob vs. Aquaman has happened, mainly because I think everyone just assumed that if SpongeBob were to come to the show, he would fight Gumball, and then he didn't, and it kind of indirectly forced this matchup into the background, at least in a way. I don't know, to me it just feels a little strange to bring it up these days, but even still, I have to admit that this is a good option for a serious SpongeBob fight, if you're trying to play it completely straight. It's definitely still his most popular matchup, and the same probably goes for Gumball. I know that these two have other opponents, and some people may be arguing that some of those opponents work better in terms of connections or dynamic or something. I really can't say for sure though, because I don't know enough about those specific matchups. All I know is that this is the most popular one, and that's probably at least for some good reason, But even with that, I don't think that necessarily means that this matchup will 100% happen sometime in the future. For one thing, we know that not everyone on the Death Battle crew loves this idea, which is part of the reason why SpongeBob fought someone else in the first place, and SpongeBob himself coming back definitely wouldn't happen anytime soon anyway, because not only may they want to prioritize other SpongeBob characters, there are also just a ton of other beloved cartoons to dive into before we just go back to SpongeBob, And I never really got into the series The Amazing World of Gumball. I would be interested in learning how the series physics work and all of that, but I'm not really rushing to see this episode, especially after getting a major inside scoop about SpongeBob earlier, even though there are some other characters I wouldn't mind seeing, even if it was pretty soon. But either way, just without the comparisons, just thinking about this matchup idea in a vacuum, I do think it would be a fun episode. It has potential in a lot of the classic cartoon ways. I just can't really see it happening for a while now, and I do think we should manage our expectations if this is one of your most wanted matchups or most wanted episodes, and it absolutely can be. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be, but I don't think it will happen for a while. Next up, we have Greg Heffley versus Nate Wright, Diary of Wimpy Kid versus Big Nate. Now, I want to give everyone a bit of a quick warning to start, because I am going to be unnecessarily mean to this matchup, okay? You guys are going to hear me get really mean for once. I loved these series when I was a kid, okay? Just to get that out of the way, this was seriously some of my favorite stuff to read growing up. I could not get enough of it. However, in the context of a versus debate, this is forced as hell, okay? I'm just gonna say it is forced as all hell. I talked earlier on this series about how there are some characters that are similar to each other, where the best way to compare them is not necessarily in a versus debate. It doesn't always have to be who would win in a fight, or, what happens in a death battle. It doesn't always have to be that way just because the characters are similar. And this is far and away the biggest example that I have brought up so far on this series. And in my opinion, it is so obviously that. It so obviously fits in that category. I know that you love versus debating, okay? I get it. You love seeing who would win in a fight, talking about characters ripping each other apart, but not all comparable characters belong in versus debates just because that's the community that we are currently in, okay? And that is fine. Not all characters need to belong in this kind of landscape, but we need to be able to determine when they do and when they don't. I have always said that variety is better when it comes to death battle and versus debating, and in most senses of the phrase, I still stand by that. However, when it comes to this kind of realm, which also includes stuff like slice of life anime, or really anything with characters where they're very much not supposed to fight, this is a very clear exception in my mind, that this is not really where versus debating should go, okay? I don't think anyone actually wants to see these two characters fight. Like, I don't think anyone actually wants to see an animation of these two middle schoolers fighting each other to the death over a different fight that they want that actually has characters that are known for fighting, okay? So at best, this matchup works as a hypothetical debate, and even then, there is zero unpredictability. If you're even somewhat familiar with these characters, the character that you think wins, and it's for the reasons that you would expect as well. There's nothing really to uncover. It's just what it is, you know, and it's so obvious. This is the kind of episode or the kind of matchup that me and my brother would treat as a joke. Like, we would ask it to each other as a joke, because we do it all the time, you know, we just like doing that. And I know some other people treat it as a joke online and they just bring it up because it's funny, but some people unironically like this matchup just because it involves series that they like and it's on an internet show, or would be on an internet show that they like as well. And I'm sorry, but that is not enough to justify whether or not a comparison between two characters belongs in verses, okay? And I know I sound very gatekeepy here, and people can have their own opinions, but this is seriously one of the strongest opinions that I hold in terms of just versus debating in general. That's just the way it is for me. Not everything should be looked at through this kind of lens, okay? Even if it can be funny on paper. If you've disagreed with everything I've said, that's fine. But now you know how I feel. But let's move away from that. We got Finn and Jake versus Mordecai and Rigby, Adventure Time versus regular show. I have not talked too extensively about this matchup on the channel before, but at the same time, I can't think of too many things I would say about it that have not already been said, because everybody loves to talk about this matchup. Everybody wants to see it become an episode, and in my opinion, for good reason. It's an amazing pick for a 2v2 fight, because everybody already likes these characters, or is at least somewhat familiar with them. Maybe not everyone would be familiar with the nitty-gritty details of their capabilities or the shows themselves, but that's what Death Battle is for, right? So, like I said, really fun characters. There's so much to work with for their personalities and also the themes of the shows, because we all know they can get crazy with their messaging and all of that. And in my opinion, this matchup works so well that it sometimes confuses me when I see people try to pit any of these characters against anyone else. Like, I get that other opinions and other matchups are inevitable to pop up, but like, come on, this is it. This is all you need for these characters. Like, if you genuinely prefer something different for any of them, then that's fine, but like, to me, this is really where they belong. And yeah, both of these shows are coming back in one way or another, like either this year or next year or something, so this could simultaneously push the episode back in order for the team to get all of the info that they need, but also prioritize it in a way, because, you know, it's all about deciding when an episode is best to do, and like Gru versus Megamind, it's like when both of the properties come back basically at the same time, like, that's a really good time to start thinking about it. But yeah, not everyone would argue that it's the most debatable fight out there, but there's still definitely a lot of stuff at play here, you know, a lot of stuff to discuss, so I still find it interesting, and it's just a super fun idea to me. Like, even if these weren't really your kinds of cartoons growing up, you know, I think it's the kind of matchup that most everyone can get behind, and again, it's a good 2v2 fight. We really need more of those. After that, Bendy from Bendy and the Ink Machine versus Cuphead from Cuphead. This is another matchup where everyone who likes it really likes it, and everyone who doesn't really doesn't. And I'm once again here to give the moderate opinion of not really being on either side here due to my lack of familiarity with the characters, but to my relatively uninformed brain, it does look like a really intriguing idea with a lot of potential in a lot of areas, at least from a sheer production perspective. And like Sans versus the Judge, which we talked about in an earlier episode, there are some indie game matchups that have accumulated so much popularity that they have also accumulated a sort of bandwagon for indie game lovers in general. Because if you really want indie games to become more commonplace on Death Battle, then you kind of just want to root for the ones that already have the best chance for happening, and this definitely falls into that camp. The one that I've kind of latched onto more so is Ori versus the Knight, which I know would come up in a later video, not immediately, but sometime later, but this is still a huge huge one, Bendy versus Cuphead, with major characters that are really recognizable even if you've never played the games. And of course, there was a DBX episode that was made around this matchup, and it was pretty amazing. So amazing, in fact, that the animation for this would-be episode of Death Battle is kind of cursed to be compared to it. It would have to do some really cool things. But of course, the show is not just about the fight, and the analyses and the script are always worth looking forward to. And yeah, deep dives into these series I think would be great. But most of all, this is just a quintessential major matchup in general, even just outside of indie games. I can't imagine any alternative happening instead. I feel like it would happen despite any flaws that people see in it for its popularity alone. Kind of like Ash versus Yugi. I know a lot of people don't like that matchup, but it is so popular, I think it would just happen anyway. And I also think Bendy versus Cuphead legitimately has some interesting elements to it, so I wouldn't have a problem with it happening, but that's just me. Next up on the list, Alastor versus Black Hat, Hazbin Hotel versus Villainous. I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys, this matchup kind of annoyed me when I started hearing it being thrown around everywhere, but just because to me it screamed desperately trying to find a fight for the current big thing, like when Hazbin Hotel started becoming a lot more popular. And obviously that's not really fair to say because good matchups can come from anywhere if something is new or old, like it really doesn't matter. I have still heard real criticisms for this matchup, but many of them I can't really confirm or deny. I don't really have enough information. I want to get more into Hazbin Hotel. One of my friends I know has recommended it to me like 1,000 times. It does seem pretty interesting, and I really know nothing about Villainous, but if you've seen it and if you like it, then that's great. But yeah, this matchup appears to me, like just on the surface, like there would be a lot of personality and energy to it, which is always a plus, regardless of what the matchup is. It might be a little style over substance, since I know the connective tissue is a little low, or at least that's what I seem to have gathered, but the analyses and the animation choices could still be fun, and some of the best episodes of the series, you know, are the ones that have those cool choices in them. So, you know, I think that's definitely worth noting. But I know both characters have other opponents, although I will say I was not hearing that much for Black Hat in terms of opponents before this matchup was really being thrown around, and Hazbin Hotel is popular, and it's probably only going to get more popular as it goes on. And this is still Alastor's most popular fight too, and he is one of the most popular characters from Hazbin Hotel, so I'm not sure what the likelihood of this matchup happening in a vacuum is, but relative to these characters' alts, I think this is decently likely to happen eventually, or maybe Hazbin Hotel needs to go on a little longer or something, I'm not sure, but still, like, I think in terms of these characters and their opponents, this is probably the most likely opponent for each of them, just based on what I've seen. And I don't really have much of an opinion here otherwise. I would like to learn more about the characters, but there will always be fights with characters I know better that I will want more, so that's just kind of the way it is. If you really like this matchup, then that's great. I hope it happens one day, and if you don't like it, then I hope it doesn't happen one day. I don't know what to say. Following that up, we have Old Man Logan versus The Last Ronin, Marvel's Wolverine versus TMNT's Michelangelo. I gotta say, before I get started, that I have been waiting to talk about this matchup very patiently. I mean, no exaggeration when I say this is one of my most wanted Death Battle episodes now, one of my favorite matchups in general. My love for it has just skyrocketed. It hasn't quite reached my top 10, but it is close. It is very close, and I could see it making it there one day. Now, I know Jay Walker is a big opponent for Mikey, and I think that's Mikey's best opponent if we're just looking at the regular material, like no Last Ronin stuff. But I have to stop beating around the bush. I want this matchup to happen more. I just have more of a personal connection to it, and I think it brings something so interesting and so unique. These are characters I love in series I love in a context that I love. They match up perfectly, like such a match made in heaven, and could make for both a sick and emotional episode. This is one where you could argue that the loser is the winner because they get to see their family again. That is so hard-hitting and such a simple, effective concept for something like Death Battle. And like I've said before, I am usually against using alternate universe characters or composite versions of characters unless it really works and it really makes sense to do so, and this one really makes sense to do so, obviously. And it brings back two characters in amazing ways. It's not just a regular run back for Wolverine or a regular run back for Mikey. Like, from an analysis perspective, we're almost looking at two different characters because they've changed so much, and that's just awesome to dig into and see what those changes are, because not everyone knows everything about these characters, but they're still really interesting even in these specific versions. And yeah, everything from the analyses to the animation could be unique and engaging. I could see my eyes being glued to the screen the whole time. Like, I really hope that this is big on Death Battle's radar and they understand the positives of doing a matchup like this, because again, I just love it more and more every day. I would love to see this get made. Moving on, Dr. Doofenshmirtz versus Mr. Crocker, Phineas and Ferb versus Fairly Oddparents. I have a very lukewarm, kind of complicated opinion on this matchup. It's not like some of the other matchups I brought up earlier where it's more so because I don't have a lot of information on them. Like, I watched these series a lot. I really enjoyed them and I really like the characters. But even with all of that, I kind of find this matchup just generally speaking. Like, if I were to really like the matchup, it would be because I really like the series and the characters, and because Crocker might not have much better in a 1v1, if we're being perfectly honest. Like, Doof might be his best opponent, or at least he's his most popular opponent, and I think it goes without saying as well that the banter potential is so amazing here. However, unfortunately, there's not really much else that draws me to this matchup. Like, I see the connective tissue here. I understand why this is a matchup, but it's not that great to me, at least not relatively speaking. There are some other matchups that have similar themes that, in my opinion, work a lot better in terms of connections than this one, so it just makes it look a little worse to me, I guess. And it also doesn't help that Crocker probably isn't my preferred opponent for Doof. Like, if I were to pick my preferred for him, maybe Dr. Draken from the Kim Possible series, but I'm not, dead set on that. And there's not that much debatability from what I can see either, so again, with all of these things just building on top of itself, it doesn't make this one of my most wanted cartoon death battles. Now, don't get me wrong, these would be fun characters to put in a death battle in general, there's no doubt about that, and the show has proven that they can make really good episodes even when the connections or the debate or some aspect is not great. But when we're speaking in hypotheticals, which is exactly what we're doing right now, that's what this show is, we still want to see those qualities because we have not seen the finished product yet. Like, having those qualities is still better than not having them. Like, I think that's pretty obvious. I like lots of matchups with characters I like Stitch versus Rocket is the biggest example of that, obviously. Many other matchups I like that have characters that I really enjoy watching or reading or seeing or whatever. But you should be able to recognize faults with ideas like that too, and actually consider them, even if you really like the characters. And for me, this just kind of overlaps with that category. If you judge matchups just based on if you like the characters and nothing else, then fine, I guess, but I completely disagree with that, and you're not gonna see that from me. And finally, to end things off, we have Captain Jack Sparrow versus Dr. Henry Jones, Pirates of the Caribbean versus Indiana Jones. This is technically one of those matchups that I think has always been around, it's just fluctuated a lot in popularity over the years, and it also feels like one of those historical playground debates between two popular movie characters. Like, the character from my favorite movie could beat up the character from your favorite movie, and I do see the appeal there. It kind of brings versus debating back to its roots a little bit. I think that's pretty cool. However, I don't think this matchup is amazing. Like I said for the last one, it has characters I like without them necessarily being a perfect match for each other, but even still, a lot of the core themes and aspects and qualities of their films overlap with each other, so I think that's a plus. And any other matchups that these characters have probably wouldn't have much that this one doesn't already provide, especially if you're not looking to bring back Lara Croft or Nathan Drake, although maybe you are, who knows. And I think there is some debatability here. Them being from such similar movies will definitely help with that. And I could see this being a choice for a live action death battle if they have the proper resources, but I do think it's more important to nail the adventurous aspect and the over-the-top nature of their capabilities. So maybe you want to go for animation instead, but I could see either one working. And it's funny because the nature of their over-the-top capabilities, one of them is mostly played for comedy, like physical comedy, and the other one for action hero bullshit. Although obviously there is some overlap there too, but I do think it's funny. Generally, I would appreciate seeing more movie-originating characters on Death Battle. James Bond versus John Wick was a good start, but I wouldn't mind seeing more. I know James Bond was technically from a book before, but whatever. It doesn't have to be this matchup, though. I want to make that clear. I'm not married to this idea, but I do still like it. I think there are enough upsides to make me excited for its reveal, and it would be kind of a blast from my past. I don't remember the last time I saw a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, but I did enjoy some of them, and with Indiana Jones, I did enjoy some of those too, so I would still be excited for this episode if it got announced. And that is gonna wrap it up for the day. Let me know if you have any major opinions on any of these matchups, and again, if you want to participate in this whole process, just keep watch of my Who Would Win polls. Give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, but either way, thank you so much for watching, have a great day, and peace out.